The rusted metal groaned in protest as 10-year-old Lily put all her weight into prying the lid open. A flash of lightning illuminated the muddy riverbank, glinting off the strange, curlicued emblem on the box's face for just a second before plunging her back into the storm's roaring darkness. Rain plastered her thin hair to her scalp, and a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran down her spine. The box had washed up during the flash flood, a dark, solid thing snagged on the roots of a half-drowned willow, and some instinct she couldn't name had screamed at her to get it. Another heave, her small fingers slipping on the wet surface, and the lock finally gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded, water-stained velvet, lay a single, impossibly ornate key. It wasn't just a key. It was heavy, made of a dark, polished metal that seemed to drink the dim light, and its head was fashioned into the same intricate crest as the one on the box, a snarling wolf's head intertwined with a thorny rose. It felt ancient, important. And as Lily's small, muddy hand closed around it, the world seemed to fall silent for a heartbeat, the storm holding its breath. A voice, thin and frail, cut through the wind from the direction of their small, leaning shack. "Lily, is that you? Come inside, child. You'll catch your death." It was her grandmother. Lily shoved the key deep into her pocket, the cold metal a secret weight against her leg, and scrambled back up the slick bank, her heart hammering a rhythm as wild as the storm itself. The shack was more of a suggestion of a home than a real one. It was a patchwork of scavenged wood and corrugated tin that shuddered with every gust of wind, the seams weeping rain in a dozen different places. But inside, it was warm. A single kerosene lamp cast a flickering, golden glow over the small room, and the air smelled of dried herbs and chicken soup. Her grandmother, Ilara, was propped up in her armchair, a nest of worn quilts tucked around her frail body. Her face, a beautiful road map of wrinkles, was tight with worry. "There you are," she breathed, her voice a reedy whisper. "I was about to come looking. What in heaven's name were you doing out in that tempest?" Lily avoided her grandmother's searching gaze, busying herself with peeling off her soaked jacket. "The river was rising. I was just making sure the water wasn't coming up to the porch." Ha! It was a lie, but not a malicious one. She couldn't explain the pull she'd felt toward the box, the feeling that she had found something, not just stumbled upon it. Ilara's eyes, the color of faded denim, softened. "You have too much worry for one so small. Come sit. The soup is still hot." Lily took the offered bowl, the warmth seeping into her chilled fingers. She ate in silence, the weight of the key in her pocket a constant, heavy presence. She could feel its intricate shape through the thin fabric, the sharp edges of the wolf's ears, the delicate curve of the rose petals. It felt like it belonged to another world, a world of castles and secrets, not of leaky roofs and watered-down soup. Their life was a quiet litany of struggles, a careful balancing act between Ilara's meager pension and what little Lily could make selling wildflowers by the roadside or running errands for the few neighbors who could afford to pay a coin or two. Every day was a question of medicine or food, of patching the roof or mending their one good blanket. Yet, there was love. It was in the way Ilara would save the best part of her meal for Lily, in the stories she would tell of a world beyond their forgotten corner of the city. Stories of brave knights and clever princesses that always ended with the triumph of a good heart over a great fortune. "Is your chest hurting today, Nana?" Lily asked softly, watching the way her grandmother's hand rested over her heart. Ilara managed a weak smile. "The rain makes the old bones ache, that's all. A little dampness in the air." But Lily saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, the subtle wince she tried to hide. The doctor had used long, complicated words, but the meaning was simple. Her grandmother's heart was tired, a clock winding down. He had prescribed pills they couldn't afford, and rest she couldn't get in a house that demanded constant vigilance against the elements. After the soup was gone and the bowls were washed, Lily helped Ilara to her small bed in the corner. Tucking the quilts tightly around her, she whispered, "Sleep well, Nana." She waited until her grandmother's breathing evened out into a soft, rhythmic sigh before she allowed herself to move. In the quiet gloom of the room, lit only by the dying embers in the small stove, she finally pulled the key from her pocket. It was even more beautiful than she remembered. In the firelight, the dark metal seemed to have a faint, bronze sheen. She traced the crest with her fingertip, a wolf and a rose. It meant something. It had to. The box was old, the velvet lining shredded and moldy, but the key was pristine, untouched by time or water. It was a contradiction, a puzzle. Her grandmother's stories filled her head. Keys in those tales always unlocked something important. A hidden treasure, a secret passage, a prisoner's chains. Maybe this was her key. Maybe it was the answer to the worry that gnawed at her day and night, the answer to her grandmother's tired heart. The thought was a spark of impossible hope in the dark. She had to know what it was, where it came from. The city was a vast, sprawling thing, a world away from their little shack by the river. But somewhere out there, someone had made this key. Someone had lost it. And Lily was determined to find them. The next few days were a blur of quiet obsession. By day, Lily was the dutiful granddaughter, tending to Ilara, fetching water, and trying to coax a few stubborn vegetables from their tiny, waterlogged garden. But in every spare moment, her mind was on the key. She would take it out and study it, memorizing every detail of the crest. The wolf's fangs were bared in a silent snarl. Its eyes seemed to glitter with intelligence. The rose was in full bloom, but its stem was a thicket of cruel-looking thorns that wrapped around the wolf's neck like a collar. It was fierce and beautiful all at once. Her first stop was the public library. It was a grand, intimidating building downtown, a place she usually only saw from a distance. The inside smelled of old paper and floor polish. A stern-faced librarian with glasses perched on the end of her nose looked down at Lily's muddy boots and patched dress with disapproval. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice as crisp as a dry leaf. Lily's courage almost failed her. She held out the key, which lay heavy and dark in her small palm. "I'm trying to find out what this symbol is. The wolf and the rose." The librarian peered at it, a flicker of interest in her sharp eyes. She took the key, her touch surprisingly gentle. "It's a family crest. Heraldry. Very old-fashioned." She led Lily to a dusty section of the library filled with enormous, leather-bound books. For hours, Lily sat at a heavy oak table, carefully turning brittle pages filled with illustrations of shields, banners, and crests. Lions and eagles, dragons and griffins, swords and crowns. A whole secret language of symbols. She searched until her eyes ached, but found nothing that matched. There were wolves, and there were roses, but none were intertwined in that specific, thorny embrace. Just as she was about to give up, defeated, the librarian returned, holding a different kind of book, a newer one with a glossy cover. "I was thinking about it," she said, her tone a little warmer now. "It's not a noble crest from the old country. I think it's local, from one of the founding families." She opened the book to a chapter titled "The Architects of the City." And there it was. On a page detailing the history of the DeWitt family was a black and white photograph of a grand iron gate. And on that gate, perfectly rendered in wrought iron, was a snarling wolf's head, entwined with a thorny rose. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The DeWitts. Even in her small, isolated world, she knew that name. DeWitt Tower scraped the sky in the center of the city, a monument of glass and steel. DeWitt Plaza was where the fancy shops were, the ones with sparkling things in the windows she could only dream of. The DeWitts owned half the city, it was said. They were more like legends than real people, a dynasty of unimaginable wealth and power. The article was brief. It mentioned Alistair DeWitt, the current patriarch, a reclusive and formidable businessman who had tripled the family fortune. It mentioned his sprawling estate on Hawthorne Hill, a place so high and secluded it was said to look down on the rest of the city like a king from his throne. There was no mention of a key, nothing about a lost box, just a picture of a gate and a name that felt like it belonged to another planet. Lily walked home in a daze, the key in her pocket now feeling impossibly heavy like a piece of a fallen star. The DeWitts. What could they possibly have to do with a girl who lived in a shack by the river? It made no sense, but the Crest was a perfect match. The key belonged to them. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. This key didn't unlock a dusty treasure chest in a fairy tale. It belonged to real-life kings. And maybe, just maybe, it was still important to them. A key this special, this well-made. People don't just throw something like that away. If it was lost, they might want it back. And people who wanted things back, especially rich people, sometimes offered rewards. The hope, so fragile at first, began to solidify into a plan. A reward. It didn't have to be a fortune. Just enough. Enough for Nana's medicine, enough to fix the roof so the rain stayed outside, enough to buy her a new warm blanket for the winter. It was a desperate, childish plan, fueled by storybook logic, but it was the only one she had. She had to get to Hawthorne Hill. She had to return the key. Hawthorne Hill was less a part of the city and more a kingdom unto itself. The streets leading up to it grew wider and cleaner, the houses larger and more distant from one another, until they weren't houses at all, but mansions, hiding behind pristine hedges and towering brick walls. At the very top, where the road ended, stood the DeWitt estate. It was exactly as the book described. A fortress. A 10-foot wall of gray stone, topped with iron spikes, surrounded the entire property. The only entrance was a massive iron gate, the very same one from the photograph, guarded by two men in crisp, dark uniforms, who stood in a stone guardhouse. Lily, standing across the street, hidden behind a large oak tree, felt her courage shrink. This wasn't like walking into the library. The guards looked severe and unapproachable, their eyes constantly scanning the street. There was no way they would let a girl like her, with her frayed dress and scuffed shoes, simply walk up and ring the bell. She watched for an hour, as sleek black cars would whisper up to the gate, pause as a guard spoke into an intercom, and then glide through as the iron behemoth swung silently open. There was no pedestrian entrance, no way in for someone on foot. It was designed to keep the world out, and it was doing its job perfectly. For 3 days she made the long trek up the hill, hiding and watching, hoping for a chance, an opportunity. She learned the guards' shift changes. She learned that a delivery truck for a fancy grocery store came every morning at 10, but each time she thought of approaching, a knot of fear would tighten in her stomach. What would she even say? "Excuse me, I found your key in the river." They would think she was a thief. Or worse, they would laugh at her. On the 4th day, her desperation outweighed her fear. Ilara had had a bad night, her breathing shallow and ragged, and the small bottle of pills by her bed was almost empty. Lily clutched the key in her hand so tightly the edges dug into her palm. She had to try. She waited for the grocery truck. As it pulled up to the gate, she took a deep breath and walked out from behind her tree, marching toward the guardhouse with a determined look on her face. One of the guards, a big man with a thick neck, stepped out to meet the truck. The other one, sitting inside, saw her approaching. His eyes narrowed. He stepped out of the guardhouse, blocking her path, his hand resting casually on his belt near a holstered object she didn't want to identify. "Can I help you, kid?" His voice wasn't mean, but it was firm, a solid wall of authority. Lily's carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. Her mouth went dry. She held up the key. I found this," she stammered. "It has the DeWitt crest on it. I think it belongs to them." The guard glanced at the key, his expression unreadable. He didn't take it. "Where did you find it?" "In a box. It washed up in the river during the storm." "The river?" He almost smiled, a slight twitch of his lips. "Kid, lots of things have that crest on them. Souvenirs, letter openers, old paperweights. It's probably just a piece of junk." "No," Lily insisted, her voice gaining a bit of strength. "It's not junk, it's heavy. It's important, I can feel it." The guard sighed, a sound of weary patience. The gate was already swinging open for the truck. "Look, Mr. DeWitt doesn't see visitors without an appointment, and he certainly doesn't have time to look at every bit of lost property someone finds. Why don't you run along home?" He wasn't listening. He saw her dress, her tangled hair, and he had already dismissed her. Tears of frustration pricked at the back of her eyes. "But it could be important," she pleaded. "Please, just show it to someone." The second guard, having cleared the truck, walked over. "What's going on, Frank?" "Kid found an old key. Thinks it's the key to the city," the first guard, Frank, said with a chuckle. The second guard looked at Lily, then at the key. His gaze was a little kinder, a little more tired. "She's right, it does have the family crest. But Frank's also right, kid. We can't bother the family with this. Our orders are very strict. I'm sorry." And that was it. The gate was closing. The wall was impenetrable. Lily stood on the manicured sidewalk, defeated, as the two guards returned to their post, having already forgotten her. She was just another piece of the outside world that didn't belong. The walk back down the hill was 100 times longer than the walk up. The grand houses seemed to mock her. The clean streets felt alien. The key in her pocket was no longer a symbol of hope. It was a cold, heavy lump of failure. She had been foolish to think it would be so easy, to think that a simple key could bridge the chasm between her world and theirs. For the DeWitts, she was invisible. Less than invisible. She was a nuisance, a stray to be shooed away from the gate. When she got back to the shack, Alara was awake. She looked paler than usual, her breathing still labored. "Did you go into town?" she asked, her voice thin. Lily just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Alara's knowing eyes searched her face. "You look like you've lost your last friend. What is it, my little bird?" And just like that, Lily's composure crumbled. She sat on the edge of the bed, pulled the key from her pocket, and told her grandmother everything. About the box, the library, the crest, the guards at the gate. She cried out all her frustration and disappointment, the tears she'd held back finally falling. Alara listened patiently, her frail hand stroking Lily's hair. When the story was finished, she took the key from Lily's hand, her fingers tracing the wolf and the rose. She was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant, as if she were looking at something far beyond the walls of their little shack. "I've seen this before," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lily looked up, her tears stopping. "What? Where?" "A long, long time ago. Before you were born." Alara's eyes were clouded with memory. "I worked for a while, when I was young and strong, cleaning in one of the big houses. Not on Hawthorne Hill, but close. Sometimes, the lady of the house would have visitors, women with fine clothes and pearls. One of them. She had a pin on her coat, this same design. The wolf and the rose. I remember thinking it was beautiful, but sad. The thorns. They looked so sharp. A new thread of the puzzle had appeared, thin and fragile. But there. Who was she, Nana? Do you remember her name?" Alara shook her head slowly. "It was so long ago. These old memories, they're like fog. But she was a DeWitt. I'm sure of it. She had a sadness in her eyes, that one, like she was carrying a heavy secret. A DeWitt woman, with sad eyes. It wasn't much, but it was something. It meant the key wasn't just a symbol of the family's power. It was personal. It had belonged to someone. And Alara's words sparked a new idea in Lily's mind, a plan far riskier than just walking up to the front gate. The estate was a fortress from the front, but a property that large, bordered by a state-owned forest preserve at the back, couldn't be a perfect stone box. There had to be another way. A forgotten gate, a weak spot in the wall, a place where the wild woods met the manicured grounds. If they wouldn't let her in the front door, she would have to find the back. The DeWitt estate was a gilded cage, and no one felt its bars more keenly than Julian DeWitt. At 32, he was the sole heir to the DeWitt empire, a role he wore as comfortably as a suit of armor, 2 sizes too small. From the outside, his life was a fantasy. The fortune, the cars, the penthouse apartment that offered a god's-eye view of the city. But from the inside, it was an endless series of boardrooms, strategic luncheons, and the crushing weight of his father's expectations. Alastair DeWitt was a titan, a man who saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, profits and losses. He had built his father's considerable fortune into a global conglomerate, but the cost had been measured in human connection. He loved his son, Julian supposed, in the way one loves a prized racehorse, as a carrier of the bloodline, a vessel for future victories. Their conversations were not about life, but about market trends, not about happiness, but about quarterly reports. The sprawling mansion on Hawthorne Hill was not a home. It was a museum to the family's success, a cold, silent place where footsteps echoed on marble floors, and the portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched with disapproving eyes. Julian rattled around in it on the weekends, a ghost in his own life. The only warmth in the house, the only life, had vanished 22 years ago, the day his older sister, Clara, disappeared. She was 18 when she left. There was no note, no explanation. She had simply walked out of the front gate one summer evening and never returned. The official story, the one fed to the papers, was that she had chosen to live a bohemian life abroad, shunning the family fortune. But the family knew better. They had hired the best private investigators money could buy, called in every favor, pulled every string. Nothing. It was as if she had stepped off the face of the earth. Her disappearance had broken something in the family. It had shattered his mother, a gentle woman who had faded into a quiet, porcelain grief and passed away a few years later. And it had turned his father from a merely demanding man into a granite monument of control and bitterness. Clara's name was never spoken. Her photos were removed. Her wing of the house was locked and left to gather dust. It was Alastair's way. If you cannot control something, you erase it. But Julian couldn't erase her. His memories of Clara were the only truly happy ones he had. She was 10 years older and had been his protector, his confidant. She was the one who read him stories, who taught him how to skip stones, who had a laugh that could fill the whole cavernous house. She was a rebel, a dreamer, constantly at odds with their father's rigid plans for her. She loved poetry and painting, things Alastair deemed unproductive. He remembered their last conversation vividly. They were sitting in the garden. She had been agitated, her eyes shining with a fierce, secret light. "Don't ever let him turn you into one of them, Jules," she had said, clutching his hand. "Don't ever let the money become more important than your own heart. Promise me." He had promised. But as the years went by, he felt that promise slipping away, buried under the weight of his inheritance. He was becoming one of them. That afternoon, he was in his father's study, a cavernous room paneled in dark mahogany, for their weekly review. Alastair sat behind a desk the size of a small boat, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his eyes the color of a winter sky. "The quarterly projections for the Asian markets are soft," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble. "I expect your new strategy to be on my desk by Monday." Julian nodded, staring at a point over his father's shoulder. "Yes, father. And the charity gala next month. You will attend. You will be charming. The press will be there. We must maintain the family's image." "Of course. Image, legacy, profit. The holy trinity of the DeWitt creed." Julian felt a familiar wave of suffocating apathy wash over him. Was this all his life would ever be? A series of tasks to be completed, a role to be played. He was interrupted by a soft buzz from the desk intercom. Alistair pressed the button, his expression annoyed at the intrusion. "What is it?" a tinny voice replied. "Apologies for the interruption, Mr. DeWitt. It's Frank from the front gate. There's a situation here, a small one." Alistair's jaw tightened. He despised unplanned situations. "What is it?" "Sir, there's a girl here, a young girl. She's climbed the back wall from the forest preserve. She's on the grounds." Julian straightened in his chair. Alistair's eyes narrowed to slits. "She's a trespasser. Have security escort her out. Call the police. I want her charged." "Yes, sir. The thing is, sir, she's asking for you. She says she has something that belongs to the family. She's holding some kind of old key." Alistair was about to bark another order, but Julian spoke up, surprising even himself. "A key? What kind of key?" The question hung in the air. It was the first time in years Julian had interrupted his father's command. Alistair shot him a look of pure ice. The guard's voice crackled back. "It's old, sir. Dark metal. It has the family crest on it. The wolf and the rose." The world tilted. The wolf and the rose. It wasn't just the family crest. It was Clara's crest. It was a design she had sketched endlessly in her notebooks, a version of the family emblem she had modified to make her own. The thorns on the rose were her addition. She said it represented the beauty and the pain of being a DeWitt. She'd had a few things made with it: a silver locket she always wore, a leather-bound journal, and a small, ornate key for a box she kept hidden in her room. A box no one had ever been able to find after she left. "Father," Julian said, his voice low and urgent, "let me handle this." Alistair stared at him, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The mention of the crest had stirred something in him, a flicker of a memory he had long tried to bury. For a moment, he looked not like a titan of industry, but like an old man haunted by a ghost. "Very well," he said, his voice clipped. "Deal with it. And be discreet." Julian was out of the chair and moving before his father had finished the sentence. He strode through the silent hallways, his heart pounding a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. A girl. A key. After 22 years of silence, a whisper from the past had just climbed over the wall. Lily's hands were scraped and her knees were muddy, but she had made it. Finding a foothold in the old stone wall where a vine had grown thick, she had scrambled to the top, her heart in her mouth, and dropped down into a world she couldn't have imagined. It was like falling into a painting. The grass was a perfect emerald carpet. Flower beds exploded in a riot of color, arranged in patterns so precise they didn't look real. A stone path wound its way through a grove of birch trees, and in the distance, she could see a glass conservatory glinting in the afternoon sun. The sheer, impossible beauty of it all made her feel smaller and dirtier than ever before. She hadn't gotten far before a man in a uniform, much like the ones at the front gate, appeared as if from nowhere. He was jogging toward her, his face set in a grim line. "Stay right there," he called out. Lily froze, clutching the key tightly in her hand. Her plan hadn't extended this far. She had been so focused on getting in that she hadn't thought about what she would do next. The guard reached her, breathing hard. He looked angry. Are you crazy, kid? You could have been seriously hurt. This is private property. I know, Lily said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry. But I had to. The men at the front gate wouldn't listen. I have to give this to Mr. DeWitt. She held out the key. The guard looked at it, then back at her, his expression softening from anger to confusion. Where did you get this? Before she could answer, another man appeared, walking briskly down the stone path from the direction of the main house. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wore tailored trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, and he moved with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime of privilege. He had kind eyes, though, and a troubled look on his handsome face. "It's all right, Bill," he said to the guard. "I'll take it from here." The guard, Bill, nodded and took a few steps back, but kept a watchful eye. The man stopped in front of Lily. He was tall, and she had to crane her neck to look up at him. "I'm Julian DeWitt," he said, his voice quiet. "You said you have a key." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. A DeWitt. A real one. She had succeeded. She held the key out to him, her hand shaking. "I found it," she said, her voice a little more than a whisper. "In the river. In a box." Julian took the key. His fingers brushed against hers, and his hand was warm. He stared at the key, turning it over and over. A wave of emotions washed over his face. Disbelief, recognition, a deep and profound sadness. He looked up from the key and met her eyes. "My sister," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This was my sister's key." He looked at Lily, truly looked at her for the first time, taking in the patched dress, the muddy knees, the fierce determination in her young face. "You climbed the wall to bring this back?" Lily nodded. "They wouldn't let me in the front." A wry, sad smile touched Julian's lips. "No, I suppose they wouldn't." He knelt, bringing himself down to her level. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Well, Lily," he said, his voice gentle, "I can't begin to tell you what this means. Thank you." He seemed about to say more, but then his eyes fell on her scraped hands. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she said quickly. "Come on," he said, standing up and holding out a hand to her. "Let's get you inside and have someone look at that. You've had quite an adventure." Lily hesitated for only a second before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm and reassuring. As he led her toward the enormous stone house, which looked more like a castle up close, she felt a dizzying sense of unreality. The world she had spied on from a distance had just opened its doors to her. Inside, the house was even more intimidating. The ceilings were impossibly high. The floors were gleaming marble, and the air was still and silent, like a church. A woman in a crisp gray uniform appeared, her face a mask of polite surprise at the sight of Lily. "Mrs. Gable," Julian said, "could you please find a first aid kit? Our guest had a fall, and perhaps bring some tea and sandwiches to the library." "Of course, Mr. Julian," the housekeeper said, her eyes wide as she took in Lily's muddy appearance. Julian led Lily into the library. If the house was a church, this was its holy of holies. Bookshelves stretched from the floor to the two-story ceiling, filled with thousands of books. A spiral staircase led up to a second-level balcony. In the center of the room, two plush leather sofas faced a fireplace big enough to stand in. He gestured for her to sit on one of the sofas, which felt like sinking into a cloud. He sat opposite her, the key resting on the polished mahogany table between them. He couldn't stop looking at it. "I haven't seen this in 22 years, he said softly, more to himself than to her. "We looked everywhere for it, for the box it opens. We thought she must have taken it with her." "Your sister?" Lily asked quietly. Julian nodded. "Her name was Clara." He picked up the key again. "This key opens a music box, a large one, made of rosewood. My grandfather gave it to her. She kept her most important things in it: letters, diaries, secrets. Mrs. Gable returned with a tray laden with a silver teapot, delicate china cups, and a plate of perfect crustless sandwiches. She also had a small medical box. As she expertly cleaned and bandaged Lily's scrapes, Julian asked Lily to tell him the story from the beginning. Lily recounted everything, from finding the box in the storm-swollen river to her failed attempt at the front gate. She left out the part about wanting a reward. It seemed crass and small in this grand, quiet room, in the face of this man's obvious pain. When she finished, Julian was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the key. "A box washed up in the river," he murmured. "The lock must have rusted through after all this time." He looked at Lily, a question in his kind eyes. Why? Why go to all this trouble? Climbing a wall, risking getting into serious trouble, just to return an old key? Lily's gaze dropped to her lap. She thought of her grandmother, of the empty pill bottle, of the weary look in her eyes. "When you find something that belongs to someone else," she said simply, "you should give it back. It's the right thing to do. And I thought it might be important." "It is," Julian said, his voice full of a feeling she couldn't quite decipher. "It's more important than you can possibly imagine." He stood up and began to pace in front of the fireplace. "For 22 years we've had nothing. Not a word, not a clue." It was as if she vanished. "This key. This is the first sign, the first piece of her that has ever come back to us." He stopped and looked down at Lily, who was nibbling on a cucumber sandwich that tasted like heaven. "You've given my family a gift, Lily, a chance to find some answers. I don't know how to repay you for that." The word repay hung in the air. This was her chance. She could ask for the reward, for the money for her grandmother's medicine. But the words wouldn't come. The look on Julian's face, the raw grief and fragile hope, made it feel wrong. Before she could decide what to say, a heavy, authoritative voice echoed from the doorway. "Julian, what is the meaning of this?" Alistair DeWitt stood there, a towering, imposing figure. His silver hair seemed to gleam in the dim light, and his eyes, the same color as his son's but colder and harder, were fixed on Lily. He looked at her as if she were a piece of dirt someone had tracked onto his priceless rug. Julian's demeanor shifted instantly. He straightened, and the warmth in his expression was replaced by a cool, formal mask. "Father, this is Lily. She's the girl who found the key." Alistair's gaze flickered to the key on the table, and for a split second an expression of pain, so quick she almost missed it, crossed his face. Then the mask of cold control was back in place. He did not acknowledge Lily. He spoke only to his son. "You brought her into the house? Into the library? She was hurt climbing the wall. It was the least I could do." "The least you could do was have security escort her off the property as instructed," Alistair said, his voice dangerously low. "This is a family matter, not a spectacle for strangers." The way he said strangers made Lily feel like she was a different species. Julian's jaw tightened. "She is not a stranger. She is the person who brought back Clara's key. She deserves our gratitude, not our contempt." The tension between the father and son was a physical thing, a crackling energy that filled the grand room. Alistair finally turned his icy gaze on Lily. "You, where did you find it?" His voice was a command, not a question. Lily shrank back into the soft leather of the sofa. "The river, sir," she whispered. "It washed up." "And you expect a reward for returning our property, I presume?" he asked, his lip curling in a slight sneer. The question was a slap in the face. It was what she had wanted, but hearing it from him said with such disdain made her feel ashamed. "No," she said, her voice small but firm. "I don't expect anything." Alistair raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Really? Then why are you here?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Lily said, echoing her earlier words to Julian. She met the old man's gaze, her fear momentarily replaced by a surge of defiance. Julian stepped forward, placing himself slightly between his father and Lily. "That's enough, Father. She's a child, and she's done us a great service." "She has done nothing but trespass and disrupt my household," Alistair retorted. He pulled a wallet from his jacket, extracted a few large bills, and tossed them onto the table. They landed next to the plate of sandwiches. "Take this for your trouble and be on your way. Bill will drive you home. We are finished here." The money lay on the table, a stark and insulting gesture. It was more money than Lily had seen in her entire life. It was the answer to all her problems. It was for Nana. But she couldn't take it. Not like this. She stood up, her small frame trembling slightly. "No thank you, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I don't want your money." She looked at Julian, her eyes conveying a silent apology. "Thank you for the tea, Mr. DeWitt, and for fixing my hand." Without another glance at Alistair or the money on the table, she turned and walked out of the library, her back straight, her head held high. She had walked into the lion's den and walked out with nothing but a bandage and her own wounded pride. But as she left the cold, silent palace and headed back toward the real world, she held on to one small thing. The look in Julian DeWitt's eyes. It wasn't pity. It was respect. And for some reason, that felt more valuable than the money she had left behind. Julian watched Lily walk away, a storm of conflicting emotions warring within him: admiration for the girl's courage, fury at his father's callousness, and a renewed, aching grief for his sister. When she was gone, he turned to face Alistair. "Was that necessary?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "To treat a child with such cruelty?" "I treated her with expediency," Alistair countered, his voice like chipping ice. He waved a dismissive hand toward the money still on the table. "People like that, they only understand one thing. She'll be back for it once her pride has cooled." "You're wrong," Julian said flatly. "You didn't see her. You didn't listen to her. All you saw was a poor girl who didn't belong in your perfect world." "She doesn't belong here," Alistair snapped. "And this circus is over. The key is back. It changes nothing. Put it away and forget about it." "Forget about it?" Julian's voice rose, echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "A piece of Clara has been returned to us after 22 years, and you want me to forget about it? This key opens her music box, Father. The box we could never find. Don't you want to know what's inside? Don't you want to know why she left?" "I know why she left," Alistair roared, his composure finally breaking. His face was flushed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She left because she was weak, because she was ungrateful. She threw away everything we gave her for some foolish, romantic notion that had no place in the real world." The outburst left a ringing silence in its wake. Alistair stood breathing heavily, the mask of control shattered, revealing the raw, unhealed wound beneath. Julian stared at him, seeing not the powerful CEO, but a grieving father trapped in a prison of his own making. "The box, Father," Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Where is it?" Alistair turned away, walking over to the fireplace to stare into the empty hearth. "It's in her rooms, where it's always been. But we searched her rooms a dozen times, every drawer, every closet." "You searched for a box," Alistair said, his back still to Julian. "You weren't looking for a window seat." Julian's mind raced. The large bay window in Clara's bedroom had a cushioned window seat built into it. He had sat there hundreds of times as a boy, reading while Clara sketched. He had never once imagined it was anything but a place to sit. He picked up the key from the table, its metal cool and solid in his hand, and walked out of the library without another word, leaving his father alone with his ghosts. Clara's wing of the house had been sealed for 2 decades. The air inside was stale and thick with the smell of dust and disuse. The furniture was all draped in white sheets, giving the rooms a ghostly, ethereal quality. Julian walked straight to her bedroom and pulled the sheet off the window seat. He ran his hand along the wooden frame until he found a small, almost invisible keyhole, hidden in the carved ornamentation. His hand trembled slightly as he inserted the key. It fit perfectly. He turned it, and there was a soft, satisfying click. He lifted the cushioned seat. The entire top of the bench was a hinged lid, and inside was a deep, cedar-lined compartment. It was her music box. And nestled inside, on a bed of faded silk, was a stack of letters tied with a ribbon and a thick leather-bound journal. Julian's heart pounded. This was it. The answers. He sat on the floor, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light slanting through the grimy window, and untied the ribbon. The letters were addressed to Clara in a sloping, masculine hand he didn't recognize. The journal was her own. He opened it to the first page. The date was from the summer before she disappeared. Her elegant, looping script filled the page. Father has decreed that I will be marrying Richard van der Sloot in the autumn. He says it's a good match, a strategic alliance. He talks about our wedding as if it's a corporate merger. I feel like a prize broodmare being sold to the highest bidder. He doesn't see me. He only sees the family name. But he doesn't know my secret. He doesn't know about Leo. And Leo is the only thing that makes me feel like I can breathe. Julian read on, his breath catching in his throat. He devoured the pages, one after another. A secret story unfolded. A life his sister had lived in the shadows. Leo. He was a groundskeeper's son, a boy from the other side of the city who worked on a neighboring estate one summer. They had met by chance, a stolen conversation over a garden wall that had blossomed into a fierce, secret love. Her journal entries were filled with him, the way he smiled, the poems he wrote for her, the way he saw her, Clara, not Clara DeWitt, the heiress. The letters were from him, passionate and full of plans for a future together, a future far away from Hawthorne Hill and Alastair's iron rule. As Julian read, a picture of his sister came into focus that he had never fully understood. He saw her desperation, her feeling of being trapped, and her deep, abiding love for a man his father would have destroyed without a second thought. The final entries were frantic, desperate. I told father I wouldn't marry Richard. He locked me in my room. He said I was hysterical, that I would come to my senses. He doesn't know the real reason. He can't ever know. Leo and I are leaving tonight. We're going somewhere he can never find us. I have to leave my jewels behind, and that is the only thing that breaks my heart. But I can't bring a child into this house. Not this house. Our baby deserves to be born in a place where it will be loved for who it is, not for its name. A child. A baby. The journal slipped from Julian's numb fingers. Clara had been pregnant. She hadn't just run away from something. She had been running to something, a new life, a new family. It changed everything. All these years they had thought she had abandoned them. But she had been trying to protect her child from the suffocating grip of the DeWitt legacy. A single, folded sheet of paper was tucked into the back cover of the journal. It was a birth certificate, a girl, born 7 months after Clara disappeared. The space for the father's name was blank. The mother's name was listed as Clara Rose, a simple, anonymous name, and the baby's name was listed as Lillian. Lillian Rose. Lily. Julian's blood ran cold. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A coincidence of names. But then he saw the place of birth. St. Jude's Mercy Hospital, the charity hospital on the poor side of town, not far from the river. A place no DeWitt would ever set foot in. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. The key showing up after all these years. The girl, living by the river near where the box was found. The name. Lily. He stumbled out of the dusty room, his mind reeling. He had to find her. He had to know. He ran down the stairs and found his father still standing in the library, staring out the window. "She had a child," Julian said, his voice hoarse. Alistair didn't turn around. "I know." The admission was quiet, devoid of emotion. Julian stopped, stunned. "You knew? You knew she was pregnant?" "I suspected," Alistair said, his voice flat. "She was reckless, foolish, and you did nothing. You just let her go, knowing she was carrying your grandchild." "She made her choice," Alistair said, turning to face him. His face was a mask of cold resolve, but his eyes were haunted. "She chose a life of squalor with that boy over her own family. She was no longer my daughter." The cruelty of it stole Julian's breath. "So you erased her, and her child, your own flesh and blood." "The DeWitt name is not a thing to be sullied by scandal," Alistair said. "I did what was necessary to protect our legacy." "Legacy?" Julian laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "What legacy? This empty house? This broken family? We have a niece, Father, a girl who has been living in poverty her whole life, while we sit here in this mausoleum. Her name is Lily." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Alistair's face. "What did you say?" "Her name is Lily," Julian repeated, his voice shaking with a rage he had never felt before. "The girl you threw money at. The girl who brought back the only piece of your daughter we've seen in 2 decades. That is your granddaughter." The great Alistair DeWitt staggered back, his hand flying to his chest as if he'd been struck. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking ancient and frail. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart for 22 years had finally been breached. And the truth, delivered by the last person he ever expected, had torn them down to the foundation. Finding Lily again was not difficult. Julian remembered the name of the security guard who had offered to drive her home. A quick call to the front gate and a cross-reference of employee records gave him the man's name. Bill Henderson, a retired cop who worked part-time. Another call, this one to Bill's personal number, filled in the final piece of the puzzle. "Yeah, I remember the kid," Bill's gruff voice said over the phone. "Felt bad for her. The old man really laid into her. Dropped her off down by the old river district. Said she lived with her grandma in one of those shacks near the Elm Street Bridge." The Elm Street Bridge. It was the poorest, most neglected part of the city, a place the DeWitts and their kind pretended didn't exist. Julian drove himself, taking one of the less conspicuous cars from the garage. As he drove down from the pristine heights of his father's estate, the city transformed. The manicured lawns gave way to cracked pavement, the mansions to boarded-up storefronts and dilapidated tenements. It felt like crossing a border into another country. The air itself seemed different, heavier. He found the shack easily enough. It was even smaller and more ramshackle than he had imagined, leaning tiredly, as if the next strong wind might carry it away. A thin curl of smoke rose from a crooked tin chimney. For a moment, he just sat in his car, overwhelmed by the reality of it. This was where his niece lived. This was where Clara's daughter had grown up. He got out of the car, his expensive leather shoes feeling obscene on the muddy, unpaved road. As he approached the shack, the door opened, and Lily stepped out. She was carrying a bucket, on her way to a communal water pump he could see down the path. She froze when she saw him, her eyes wide with shock. "Mr. DeWitt?" Julian's carefully prepared words vanished. Seeing her here in this setting made the truth of the birth certificate hit him with the force of a physical blow. She had Clara's eyes. He had been so focused on the key and the mystery before that he hadn't seen it, but now it was unmistakable. The same deep, thoughtful blue, the same slight almond shape. "Lily," he said, his voice strained, I need to talk to you. And your grandmother." Lily looked from him to his expensive car, her expression a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Why? Is this about the key?" "In a way," he said. "It's about what the key unlocked." He followed her inside. The single room was tiny but scrupulously clean. An elderly woman with kind, weary eyes was sitting up in a small bed in the corner, a patchwork quilt pulled up to her chin. This had to be Alara. She looked at Julian, her gaze sharp and intelligent despite her obvious frailty. "Nana," Lily said, "this is Mr. DeWitt, the man from the big house." Alara's eyes narrowed slightly. "I know who he is." Julian felt a powerful, disorienting sense of shame. He, who was used to commanding boardrooms and intimidating rivals, felt like an intruder, a clumsy giant in this small, fragile space. He didn't know where to begin. "I owe you an apology," he started, looking at Lily. "My father. He was wrong to treat you that way, and you were right to refuse the money." He turned his attention to Alara. "And I owe you my gratitude. Lily is an extraordinary girl. You've raised her well." Alara's expression didn't change. "I've done my best." "We found my sister's journal," Julian said, deciding to get straight to the point. "We know about her child. We know her name was Lillian." He saw a flicker of something in Alara's eyes, not surprise, but a deep, ancient sadness. "I know why you're here," she said, her voice a soft, reedy whisper. She struggled to sit up straighter, and Lily rushed to her side to fluff her pillows. "You can stop searching, Mr. DeWitt. You've found her." She placed her frail, trembling hand on Lily's head. The world stopped. The air in the tiny room grew thick and heavy. Lily looked back and forth between her grandmother and the strange, sad man, her mind struggling to grasp the meaning of the words. Julian felt his knees go weak. Hearing it said aloud, seeing the confirmation in the old woman's eyes, made it terrifyingly real. He sank onto the single wooden stool in the room, his head in his hands. "How?" he managed to ask, his voice muffled. "How did she end up with you?" Alara sighed, a long, tired sound, and began to speak. Her voice was weak, but the story was clear, a memory she had held close for 10 long years. "I didn't know her well. Her name was Clara. She was a friend of my daughter, Maria. My Maria. She was a nurse at St. Jude's. Clara came there to have the baby, alone and scared. She used a different name, but Maria recognized her. She had seen her picture in the papers once." Alara paused, taking a ragged breath. "Clara was sick after the birth. A fever that wouldn't break. She knew she was dying. She made Maria promise to keep the baby safe. She was so afraid her family would find the child and take her away. She said they would crush her spirit, turn her into one of them. She wanted her daughter to be free, to be loved." Tears streamed down Ilara's wrinkled cheeks. "My Maria promised. And when Clara was gone, she brought the baby home. She brought me Lily." Julian looked up, his own eyes wet. "Your daughter? Maria?" "She died 3 years ago," Alara said softly. "A sickness in her lungs. Since then, it's just been me and my little bird." She stroked Lily's hair, her touch full of a fierce, protective love. "I'm not her blood, but she is the heart of my heart. She is my granddaughter in every way that matters." Lily stood frozen, her world completely upended. The stories she had been told, the life she had known, it was all a lie. And the truth was a wild, impossible fairy tale. This man, This near stranger from a castle on a hill was her uncle. The cold, cruel man who had thrown money at her was her grandfather. And her mother. Her mother was a girl named Clara, a girl who had died to keep her safe. She looked at Alara, her nana, the only family she had ever known, and saw the years of sacrifice and love in her tired eyes. She looked at Julian, at the face that was so much like her own, and saw the echo of a mother she had never met. The key hadn't just unlocked a box, it had unlocked her entire life. A sob escaped her lips, a sound of confusion and grief, and a dozen other emotions she couldn't name. She buried her face in Alara's quilt, her small shoulders shaking. Julian rose and came to the bedside, kneeling on the rough wooden floor. He reached out a hesitant hand and placed it on her back. "Lily," he whispered, "I know this is impossible to understand, but I promise I will make this right." He looked at Alara over Lily's bent head. "She needs a doctor," he said, his voice firm with a newfound purpose. "You both do. I'm taking you away from here. Today. Now." Alara looked at him, her gaze searching his face, looking for the DeWitt cruelty she expected to find. But all she saw was a man whose heart was breaking, a man desperate to reclaim the family he had just discovered. She finally gave a slow, tired nod. "She deserves a better life," Alara whispered. "She deserves everything." That afternoon, a quiet, discreet car with blacked-out windows arrived at the shack by the river. Julian carefully helped Alara into the back seat, wrapping her in a warm cashmere blanket he had brought from his car. He then lifted Lily, who was still in a state of quiet shock, and sat her gently beside her grandmother. As the car pulled away, leaving the leaning shack and the muddy riverbank behind, Lily looked back one last time. It was the only home she had ever known. She was leaving her entire world behind for a new one she didn't understand. A family of strangers. She clutched Alara's hand, the only solid, familiar thing in her swirling universe. She was terrified. But as she looked over at the man in the front seat, at the kind profile of her uncle, she also felt a tiny, fragile flicker of something else. The same feeling she had when she first held the key. Hope. The transition from the shack to the DeWitt estate was a violent, sensory shock. Alara was settled into a sprawling guest suite on the ground floor, a room larger than their entire shack, with a bed so soft she felt she might sink into it and disappear. A team of the city's best doctors, summoned with a single phone call from Julian, descended upon the house. They examined Alara with quiet efficiency, their hushed, professional tones a stark contrast to the dismissive charity doctors of her past. Their diagnosis was grim but not hopeless. Her heart condition was severe, a result of years of neglect and hardship, but with proper medication, nutrition, and most importantly, rest, she could live for years. For the first time, the lines of constant pain on Alara's face began to soften. While Alara was being tended to, Julian took Lily on a quiet tour of the house. He showed her the gardens, the conservatory, the library. He tried to fill the cavernous silence with stories of his sister, pointing out Clara's favorite reading nook, the tree she loved to climb, the piano she used to play. He was trying to give Lily a mother she had never known, to build a bridge from her past to her present. Lily walked through the silent, opulent rooms like a ghost. She touched nothing. It all felt like a museum, beautiful and cold and utterly alien. This was her mother's home, but it didn't feel like a home at all. It felt like the cage Clara had so desperately fled. Later that day, she sat by Alara's bedside, holding her hand. "Are they going to make me stay here?" she whispered, her voice small. Alara squeezed her hand. "This is your family now, little bird. Your blood." "You're my family," Lily insisted, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I don't want another one." Love isn't a thing you can divide, Ilara said softly, her voice stronger now with the first dose of proper medicine. It only multiplies. You can love me, and love them too. Your mother. She would want you to know them, to know where you came from. But the one person Lily didn't want to know was her grandfather. Alistair had remained unseen since their arrival, secluded in his study like a wounded animal in its lair. The house staff tiptoed around, speaking in whispers. His presence was a dark cloud hanging over the estate. The confrontation came the next day. Julian insisted that Lily and Alistair needed to see each other. He led Lily to the door of the study, her small hand trembling in his. "I'll be right here," he promised. Lily took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Alistair was standing by the window, looking out over his perfect, manicured kingdom. He looked older than he had the day before, diminished. He turned as she entered. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his cold eyes searching her face, looking for some trace of his long-lost daughter. Lily stood her ground, her fear battling with a nascent sense of her own worth. She was not the dirt on his rug. She was Clara's daughter. "Why did you hate her?" Lily asked, her child's voice cutting through the heavy silence with startling clarity. The question caught Alistair off guard. He had been expecting tears, accusations, demands. Not this simple, direct inquiry. "I didn't hate her," he said, his voice a rough rasp. "She was my daughter. I loved her." "You hurt her," Lily stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. "You tried to make her someone she wasn't. Nana said my mother wanted me to be free. She ran away from you to make sure I was." Each word was a small, sharp stone hitting the wall of his denial. For the first time in his life, Alistair DeWitt had no counter-argument, no strategic response. He was being faced with the simple, unvarnished truth by a child who had his daughter's eyes. "She was willful," he stammered, the words sounding weak and hollow even to himself. "Headstrong. I was trying to protect her, to give her a good life." "She didn't want your life," Lily said. "She wanted her own." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "You have a second chance," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You have me. And you have Nana. Are you going to throw us away too?" The silence stretched, thick and profound. Alistair looked at this small, determined girl who stood before him, a living embodiment of his greatest failure and his last hope for redemption. He saw Clara in her stance, in her courage. But he also saw something else, something forged in hardship and love, something strong and true that had nothing to do with the DeWitt name. The ice around his heart, frozen for 22 years, finally began to crack. A single, difficult tear traced a path down his stern, weathered cheek. He sank into his large leather chair, the great titan of industry suddenly looking like a tired, broken old man. "No," he whispered, the word catching in his throat. "No, I won't." It wasn't an apology, not yet. But it was a beginning. The weeks that followed were a delicate, tentative dance of discovery. The DeWitt estate began, slowly, to feel less like a museum and more like a home. The silence was broken by the sound of Lily's cautious exploration, by the murmur of her voice as she read to Ilara in the sun-drenched garden, and by the quiet conversations between Julian and his father, conversations that were, for the first time, about family, not business. Alistair began to change. The transformation was not sudden or dramatic, but a slow erosion of his pride and grief. He started by joining Lily and Ilara in the garden, at first just sitting at a distance, watching. Then, one day, he brought Ilara a cup of tea. Another day, he asked Lily to read a passage from her book aloud. He started telling her stories about Clara as a little girl. Not the heiress, but the daughter who loved to catch fireflies and who had a mischievous, infectious laugh. He was trying, in his own clumsy way, to be the grandfather he had never known he was. Julian, for his part, found a purpose that had been missing from his life. He became Lily's guide, her protector, and her friend. He took her into the city, not to boardrooms, but to parks and museums. He discovered she had a quick, inquisitive mind and a deep well of compassion. He also saw how out of place she felt, how she watched the other children with a longing that broke his heart. He enrolled her in the best school in the city, but she didn't just go to class. With Julian's help, she started a program. She had seen the wealth of resources at her new school, the library, the computers, the art supplies, and she knew what a difference they could make. She arranged for students from her old neighborhood to be bussed in on Saturdays for tutoring and creative workshops run by volunteer students from the private school. She was building a bridge between her two worlds, refusing to forget where she came from. The key became a symbol for them. It lay on the mantelpiece in the library, a constant reminder of how their fractured family had been brought back together. It had unlocked so much more than a box of secrets. It had unlocked their hearts. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after Lily's arrival, the four of them were in the garden. Ilara, looking healthier and happier than Lily had ever seen her, was teaching Lily how to press flowers. Julian was sketching in a notebook, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. Alistair sat quietly, watching them, a soft, unfamiliar smile on his face. Lily looked up and caught his eye. "Grandfather," she said, the name still feeling new on her tongue. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," he said. "My father," she said hesitantly. "Leo. Do you know what happened to him?" The smile faded from Alistair's face, replaced by a look of deep regret. He sighed. "We tried to find him, Lily. After we found Clara's journal, Julian hired the best investigators. We learned that he and Clara had made it to a small town a few states away. He was working as a carpenter. They were happy by all accounts, but there was an accident at his workshop. A fire. It happened about a month before you were born. He didn't survive." Lily absorbed the news in silence. It was another sad piece of her story, another ghost. But somehow it didn't hurt as much as she thought it would. Her life was so full now. She had her nana, her uncle, her grandfather. She had a family. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. Alistair reached out and put his hand over hers. His touch was warm and steady. "Your parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They would be so proud of you, Lily. So very proud." Later that evening, Lily stood at her bedroom window, the same bay window that had hidden her mother's secrets for so long. She looked out over the sparkling lights of the city below. It no longer looked like a separate, alien world. It was her city, her home. She thought about the impossible journey she had taken, from a shack by the river to a mansion on a hill. She thought about the anger and the sadness, but most of all, she thought about the love that had guided her, Ilara's fierce, unwavering love, and the new, tentative love of the family she had found. Down in the muddy river, a rusted, empty box was probably sinking deeper into the silt, its purpose served. It had carried its precious cargo through the storm and delivered it safely to shore. The key had found its way home, and in doing so, it had shown everyone the way home too. It had reminded them that a family is not built on wealth or a name, but on forgiveness, acceptance, and the courage to unlock your heart, even after you've sealed it shut. And as Lily watched the city lights twinkle like 1,000 fallen stars, she knew, with a certainty that filled her entire being, that this was just the beginning of her story.